Hello again, gamers. Welcome back for another episode of Grokking Twilight Imperium. I'm the board game captain, and today I'm going to be covering the Embers of Muaat. So I want to start off by giving a big thank you to one of my viewers, V4A2. I hope that's how it's pronounced. V4A2 requested that I cover the Embers of Muaat in one of my episodes. So this episode is for you. So before we get too into this, I do want to say I've got a ton of links in the description down below that you can check out at your leisure. There's a link to BoardGameCaptain.com, which is a great hub for all things Board Game Captain, and also Lynn and I have started doing semi-regular blog posts over there, so check that out. There's also a link to my Teespring store. If you'd like to get yourself some cool gamer gear, some Board Game Captain merchandise, you can head over there to buy some t-shirts or mugs, etc. And there's also a link to my Patreon. If you're in a position to and would like to support the channel, you can head over to my Patreon, link it in the description below. Alright, so the Embers of Muaat. Now, the Embers of Muaat are a race of beings from a very high temperature planet who themselves appear to be consumed slowly over the course of their lives by heat. Which is why they're generally known as the Embers of Muaat. The actual name of the race is not the Embers of Muaat, it is the Gashlai. But other races generally refer to them as Embers. Now, they were at one point in their history enslaved by the Jol-Nar, but because of a war that the Jol-Nar were having during the Twilight Wars between them and the Sardakk-Nor, and combined with a plague that they had picked up on the homeworld of Muaat, that decimated a good portion of the population, they had to abandon their shipyards there. The Embers of Muaat rose up, overthrew the slavers, and then were able to take over the shipyards, build some of their own war sons with the shipyards were being used to build, and have now become a power in their own right. These guys are really interesting, and the biggest, coolest thing about them is you get to start with war sun technology. You start with a war sun, and you start with the ability to make war suns. Now, their starting war suns have one reduction in their stats, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but they can improve them to be even better than everyone else's war suns when they make them. And they have a lot of other cool abilities too. So let's talk about the Embers of Muaat. Let's start with, what do you start with? So the home system for the Embers of Muaat starts with a single planet, which is Muaat. Now, the home planet of Muaat has 4 resources and 1 influence. So it's not very good for influence, but it's pretty good when it comes to resources. You've got a decent amount of buying power for your first time that you're going to need to spend resources to buy stuff. So this is not too bad at all. Next, I want to talk about the starting fleet, because the Embers of Muaat have one of the best starting fleets in the game. It used to be a little subpar before the expansion of Prophecy of Kings came out, but now with the expansion of Prophecy of Kings, one of the abilities from one of their leader cards helps to make it much better. And I will explain that in a moment. So their starting fleet is a War Sun. It is their prototype War Sun 1, which I'm going to go into in a moment. It is 2 fighters, a space dock, and 4 ground troops. So this is really good. Considering you have 6 capacity on that War Sun, it can carry all those ground troops and those fighters. But I don't recommend that you do so. I don't recommend just setting out with a bunch of ground troops and fighters and that War Sun, because I have an alternate strategy in mind for you, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. The next thing I want to talk about are the faction abilities for the Embers of Muaat. So they get 2. They have Starforge and Gashlai Physiology. So Starforge says, action. Spend 1 token from your strategy pool to place either 2 fighters or 1 destroyer from your reinforcements in a system that contains 1 or more of your war suns. So your war sun is a mobile factory, and without spending resources, just spending strategy tokens, you're able to have that war sun either build a destroyer or a pair of fighters for you. This is really awesome. But keep in mind, your strategy tokens are going to be at a premium, because you're gonna need to use them for this ability and some others that I'm going to get to momentarily. So a big thing with the Embers of Muaat is you are going to want to take the leadership strategy card, as well as any other cards that might help you to get tokens as much as possible, and you're also going to want to be getting your hands on some planets with high influence values, so if someone else takes leadership, you can at least do the secondary ability and buy a bunch of tokens to spread between your tactics, fleet supply, and strategy pool, because you're going to need lots of tokens. The next ability is Geschlei Physiology, which allows your ships to move through supernovas. Now, moving through is not the same as moving into. You can't go in there and loiter, but you can go through them at the start of the game, which is something that no other faction can do. So that is actually a pretty interesting benefit in regard to mobility for the Embers of Muaat. They have these systems that if you get any in your starting hand, you can place in areas that could be between you and an enemy force, and they're not going to slow you down, but they might slow down your opponent if you place them right there on the border. It's a great place to hide behind and be able to shoot through and do sneak attacks on your enemy. So the next thing I want to talk about for the Embers of Muaat is their flagship, which is the Inferno. Now, the Inferno has an 8 cost. It has a combat capability of 5 with 2 attacks, which makes it equivalent to 2 dreadnoughts. That's really good. It has 1 move, 3 capacity. That's pretty standard. Sustained damage, also standard. But here we get another one of those abilities for spending strategy tokens, and it is action. Spend 1 token from your strategy pool to place 1 cruiser in this unit system. So similarly to how the Starforge allows your War Suns to count as factories that can make fighters and destroyers, the flagship can make cruisers. This is awesome. You are going to not actually need that many space docks out there. You're going to make stuff in your home space, but you're going to have these mobile factories between your flagship and your War Suns going out amongst the galaxy and building smaller ships. So yeah, you're not going to need as many space docks as other factions require. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the other unique starting unit that is on their faction card. It is the Prototype War Sun 1. So the Prototype War Sun 1 has all the same stats as a normal War Sun, with one exception, which is that their movement is only a 1. Normal War Suns have a movement of 2, but no one else gets to start with normal War Suns. So to keep you from zipping off and making a beeline for an enemy's homeworld and laying siege to it, they slowed it down. It's got a movement of 1. But it still has all the other great abilities of the War Sun. It costs 12. It gets a combat of 3 with 3 shots. It has, again, movement is down to a 1, capacity of 6. It gets a bombardment of 3 with 3 shots. It has sustained damage, and it causes other players' units in the system it is in to lose planetary shield. So it is only a slight downgrade from the normal War Suns. And getting to start with one of these on the board and the ability to make them is fantastic. And one of their techs, which we're going to get to momentarily, is an upgraded version of that is actually superior to the normal War Sun technology. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is their starting technology. They get 1 starting technology, and it is Plasma Scoring. Plasma Scoring says when 1 or more of your units use bombardment or space cannon, 1 of those units may roll 1 additional die. Now, this is decent considering you start with a War Sun, and an extra die that hits on a 3 or better when you've already got 3 dice that hit on 3 or better is really good. It's really great for softening up those ground troops before you head in to invade a planet yourself. This will be really decent for your War Suns, and you will almost certainly get both of your War Suns out and have them leading fleets around. In addition to, of course, having your flagship out leading a 3rd major fleet around. These War Suns, along with some other ships, will be really devastating in, again, softening up those ground troops before you invade. The next thing I want to talk about are the leader cards and the mech card. Now, these cards are incredibly important to the strategy that I think is integral to playing the Embers of Muaat, especially now in, of course, the post-Prophecy of Kings era, because they added a lot of new interesting abilities to the Embers of Muaat when the Prophecy of Kings came out. So, first, the Agent. The Agent is Umbat. Umbat has an ability that is an action like all agents do. You exhaust this card to choose a player. That player may produce up to 2 units that each have a cost of 4 or less in a system that contains 1 of their War Suns or their flagship. So I've already talked a lot about how you're going to want to get your second War Sun out, and you're going to want to get your flagship out, and you're going to spread them out, leading large fleets on different sides of the galaxy, building their own ships to support them. Well, this is another way to continue to build other sorts of ships in that system. Now, since you can make 2 units of cost 4 or less, you can build anything all the way up to and including dreadnoughts. So, you have a Warson out there and you want it to be backed up by a pair of dreadnoughts. As long as you have the resources and trade goods to spend on those dreadnoughts, you can use this ability to build 2 dreadnoughts as an action for one of your turns. Really awesome ability, but even more so than that, in my opinion, this is the card that makes their starting fleet super amazing. Because, looking at their starting fleet, granted, militarily, it's fantastic because you have a Warson. You only have one capital ship, and it is that Warson, which means you're going to be a little slow to colonize. Not so when you think about the Umbat. So Umbat, you can use him on your first turn of your first round. And what you're going to do is you're going to use him to build a carrier. Now you're going to have Muaat, which has 4 resources. 3 of those can go towards the carrier, and then you could maybe build 1 fighter or 1 ground troop, or, in my opinion, probably 1 destroyer to help back up that carrier, to give it a little support. And then, since you've done this as your very first turn on the very first round, in your second and third round, you can start sending out the Warsun and the carrier to colonize 2 planet systems, making the Embers of Muaat a top-tier colonizer specifically because of their agent ability. Which is fantastic, because before, while they were militarily very powerful, they were rather slow to colonize. With the expansion, that's not the case anymore. This is really awesome. I absolutely love their agent. My opinion is actually this may be one of the best agents in the game. Next, I want to talk about the Commander. So the Commander is unlocked when you produce a Warsun. You start with the ability to produce a Warsun. If you go by the tips I am telling you and get a lot of planets on your first round, hopefully you'll have enough resources to go about making a Warsun maybe as early as round 2. You might have enough trade goods and also resources from planets you have taken to maybe pay that 12 costs and get another Warsun made. And once you do, you get to unlock Magmus. Now, Magmus has an ability that after you spend a token from your strategy pool, you gain 1 trade good. Now, as you've been seeing, lots of the great abilities of the Embers of Muaat require them to spend a token from their strategy pool. You're going to be spending tokens from your strategy pool all the time, getting those free trade goods that you then can spend on, rebuilding one of your Warsuns if it gets destroyed, or rebuilding your flagship if it gets destroyed, or just building lots of various fleets, because a lot of your abilities allow you to build multiple ships in your fleets that have either your Warsuns or your flagship. Yeah, you're going to want those resources. Resources are going to be very good, because you are going to want to have some of the biggest, baddest fleets out there in the galaxy. Now, the third of the leaders, of course, is the hero. And like all heroes, their hero is unlocked when you have completed 3 objectives. It is called Adjudicator Baal, Star Scourge, and when you unlock him, he becomes Nova Seed, Gravitational Collapse. After you move a Warsun into a non-home system other than Mechatol Rex, you may destroy all other players' units in that system and replace that system tile with the Muaat Supernova tile. If you do, purge this card and each planet card that corresponds to the replacement system tile. This is one of the most devastating offensive hero abilities in the game. You can take, if you can make it to one of the most valuable systems that one of your opponents who maybe is winning or is your greatest threat to winning, get to that system, you can literally wipe out the system. And not just all the forces there, you can destroy the planets. So they can't even take it back. This is fantastic. With some wormhole trickery, you could even do this on a system all the way on their side of the galaxy. Finally, I have the mech for the Embers of Muaat is the Ember Colossus. 2 costs, 6 combat, sustained damage, all standard. But the ability is when you use your Starforge faction ability, which remember is the one where you can build either fighters or destroyers in a system that has your Warsun. If you use it in an adjacent system to this mech, you may place 1 infantry from your reinforcements with this unit. So yet another ability that gives you free units. You're going to want these guys out there. You're going to eventually want to get one of these on each of your Warsuns so that you can slowly build up extra ground troops that you're going to be dropping off and leaving all over the place every time you do that ability. You're going to want one of these on each Warsun, at least 1. Really awesome, great way to get some free ground troops. Next, I'd like to talk about what technologies I recommend for the Embers of Muaat. Now, there are plenty of techs that can work well for them, especially militaristic style techs, and also, of course, many of the unit upgrades. Of course, they're going to be able to be building dreadnoughts and cruisers and destroyers with their abilities outside of the space docks, just building them along with their flagship and their war sons. So upgrading those are going to be a high priority. But there are some specific techs I do want to recommend specifically so that you can get the prerequisites to get your faction specific techs, and specifically the prototype war son 2, which is really important. So now, again, you only start with plasma scoring, but as a red tech, because you are going to need to get one more red tech to be able to get your first faction specific tech, the Magnus reactor, unless you get a technology specialty on a planet that you can use. I would like to recommend self-assembly routines. After one or more of your units use production, you may exhaust this card to place one mech from your reinforcements on a planet you control in that system. After one of your mechs is destroyed, gain one trade good. We've already talked about how awesome the mechs are and how much you're going to want to get them out in the galaxy there. So a way to get them out for free, plus to get trade goods back if they're destroyed, is really awesome. I highly like self-assembly routines. Now, after you get self-assembly routines, you will need one more red tech before you can get the Warsun Prototype 2, but like I said, that one red tech is going to be their other faction-specific tech. But the Warsun Prototype 2 also requires you to have one yellow tech. So again, as per usual, I'm going to be recommending the Starwing tools, because the Starwing tools are awesome. These guys are all about building up tons of huge fleets. You're going to have lots of fleets. Getting to have a tech that says when one or more of your units use production, reduce the combined cost of the production by 1 is really awesome. Now, granted, this is not quite as good for the Embers of Muaat as it is for other players, because it will not work on all their special abilities on building units with their flagship or their war sons. But when you do build stuff at a space dock, this will help you save a little bit of cash. And finally, a green one, and this is specifically to be able to upgrade the cruiser. This is psychoarchaeology. You can use technology specialties on planets you control without exhausting them, even if those planets are exhausted. During the action phase, you can exhaust planets you control that have a technology specialty to gain one trade good. Now, this is going to be really important for getting lots of your other unit upgrades. Being able to continually use all of your technology specialties is always really good, especially because the Dreadnought's going to require you to have a couple of blue techs. I'm not going to specifically be recommending any blue techs necessarily. There are plenty that will work well for the Embers of Muaat, but I think, generally speaking, you're actually going to be having your focus more on getting technology specialties so you can get the unit upgrades quicker if you can, because you really want to get upgraded units with them. Now, their two faction-specific techs are phenomenal. The first one is the Magnus reactor. Your ships can move into supernovas. So now you can loiter in a supernova where no one else can go and be totally protected, and then sneak attack out of it. Its second ability is, after one or more of your units use production in a system that either contains a war sun or is adjacent to a supernova, gain one trade good. So this is another way to get some free trade goods. If you're going to want to, once you get this, you're going to want to try to build a space dock adjacent to a supernova if you can, or use your hero ability to blow up a system adjacent to one of your space docks so that you can take full advantage of this, and then every round you're going to want to build at that space dock and get your free trade good. And then finally, we have probably the most awesome capital ship in the game, the Prototype War Sun 2. So, here's the thing. The Prototype War Sun 1 was a War Sun with one less movement. The Prototype War Sun 2 is a War Sun with 3 movement, whereas the normal War Sun only has 2, and it reduces its cost to 10, where normally they cost 12. This is a fantastic upgrade. Highly mobile war sons that are cheaper? Yes, please. This is phenomenal. This is a really, really good technology. You're going to want to get this out, which is why I recommended just enough techs to be able to get your Prototype War Sun 2 out on the board. I want to make a special note of the faction-specific promissory note for the Embers of Muaat. It is the Fires of the Gashly. Now, Fires of the Gashly is probably the best promissory note in the game. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it is one that holds a lot of weight, and you're going to be able to get a lot for it. But you have to be careful. You do want to be careful because it will also give a lot to whoever you give it to. So you want to be careful and give it to someone else who's not necessarily winning and form an alliance with that player maybe when another player is winning. Someone who you hope isn't going to stab you in the back with it, because here's how this works. When you give them Fires of Gushlai as an action, they can remove one token from your fleet pool, and then they will return this card to the Embers of Muaat player, and they gain the War Sun technology card. So you can give other people the ability to build War Suns. This is unbelievably valuable. This is something I would possibly do early game, maybe even on the first round, if, say, someone else was playing the Embers of Muaat and you really wanted to get like all 6 of their resources out of them, so that instead of just building one carrier with Umbat on your first action, maybe you could trade this to them, get all that money, and you could do something like, say, build a carrier and build a mech, so that way later when you do the Starforge faction ability, the mech will immediately get its ability to give you another free infantry. That will all chain together into becoming an amazing first turn if you're able to pull off this deal if one of the other players is playing the Embers of Muaat, which could be pretty freaking awesome. But keep in mind, you will have also just given that player the ability to get War Suns out, and now you will not be the only player who has War Suns on the board. And also keep in mind, you should keep your fleet small, because you are going to lose one of your fleet supply if they use this card. So be aware of that. It is also part of why leadership is going to be so important when I'm talking about these strategy cards. So now let's talk about the strategy cards. What strategy cards do I recommend to you? Leadership, leadership, leadership. If you don't do this on the first round, if you don't get it on the first round, you should try to get it on the second round. By the second round, you should have hopefully gotten the leadership at least once, because this is unbelievably important. You're going to be spending so many tokens, and you're going to need this to get them back. First round, you could use this to get 3 tokens back. Second round, it could be even more valuable if you don't get it the first round, though you may want to get it the first round anyway. But second round, you could use it to get the 3 tokens, plus also spend 3 influence each to get additional tokens back if you've grabbed some planets with some high influence value. Leadership is really going to be incredibly valuable for the Embers of Muaat. Now, if you're not able to get the leadership, or if you're playing a 3-player game, you can grab a second of the strategy cards. What other cards are good to go for? Warfare is good to go for, because as I said before, if you're using Umbat as your first action, you are going to have a top-tier colonizer fleet. You can use Warfare to colonize even a extra multi-planet system, which is fantastic. Technology is another one that's really good, because while there aren't a huge number of non-unit upgrade technologies that you're really going to want to go for, you are going to want to get a lot of those unit technologies, and to get them, you're going to need to get the prerequisites. And also, you're going to want to make sure to get the prerequisites to be able to get out your faction-specific tech, so technology would be also a good secondary one to go for. Construction is going to be rare for you. You're going to want to build another space dock adjacent to a supernova, or build one that later you might make a supernova adjacent to using your hero ability. But you're actually not going to need as many space docks out there. You're probably not going to get all of yours out like a lot of other factions will, because of how you can build ships with your abilities in systems that have either your War Sun or your Flagship in them. In addition, diplomacy will occasionally be useful for keeping someone from attacking you in the rear. Politics, maybe not so much, but also, of course, Imperial will be occasionally useful to help you find those extra secret objectives, as well as qualifying for some public objectives. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what secret objectives you should be looking for when you're using the primary or secondary ability of the Imperial strategy cards. What ones would work really well with the Embers of Muaat. Now there's quite a few that situationally might work well with the Embers of Muaat, but there's actually very few that specifically just work well in a vacuum, when we're not talking about, what the rest of the galaxy might look like or where your enemies might be. There's really only a handful I'm going to specifically recommend. So first one, adapt new strategies. Own 2 faction techs. Your faction techs are really good. You're going to want to get them. The next one is hoard raw materials. Control planets that have a combined resource value of 12. You start with a resource value of 4. You're a third of the way there. That's also going to be good for the Embers of Muaat. Next, we have Master of Laws of Physics. Own 4 technologies of the same color. I have already recommended 3 red techs for you. If you stumble upon this, just get another red technology. I mean, the top red technology though I did not recommend it, is super awesome. The assault cannon. At the start of a space combat in a system that contains 3 or more of your non-fighter ships, your opponent must destroy one of his non-fighter ships. There is never a time where this is not fantastic. If you have the assault cannon out on the board and you are able to use it well with large fleets moving in, wiping out ships before they even have to fight, and then you've got War Sons or your flagship in there, you're going to do a lot of damage. You're going to wipe out fleets. And the next one I want to recommend is Prove Endurance. Be the last player to pass during a game round. So if you manage to take the leadership a few times and get tons of tokens out there, you can just keep taking the action from Starforge or the action from your Inferno, the flagship, to build ships. In the case of both of those actions, they don't even cost you any resources, just the tokens. So if you have gotten Prove Endurance, you can just stockpile up on these, and then one round, like maybe round 2 or so, just do that a whole bunch and throw out a whole bunch of ships. Fill up your 6 capacity with fighters. Throw out a couple of cruisers with your flagship. Throw out a couple of destroyers with your War Sun to help back him up. And you'll be the last person to pass, because this is something you could just keep doing it basically until everybody else passes, and then be like, okay, I pass. So, but again, that is a big part of why the leadership strategy card is going to be so important for the Embers of Muaat, because they are going to need to have a ton of strategy tokens to be able to use for these things. Okay, so there you have it. That is my recommendations for playing the Embers of Muaat. First action, first turn, you want to use the Umbat ability. You want to continue to use your Agent Umbat and his ability all game for being able to make ships where you don't have space docks. Just like you're going to want to use the Starforge and the Inferno's ability to also make small ships where you don't have space docks. And have Ember Colossuses in those areas to get free resources to help you make more ships. You're going to be one of the fastest fleet builders in the game. You're going to have huge fleets that are captained by either your flagship or one of your War Sons that will be absolutely devastating to face. Your opponents will be deathly afraid of facing them. And then eventually you're going to have prototype War Son 2s, which have a movement of 3, are going to be zipping around the board with upgraded cruisers doing crazy damage that your opponent won't know where you're going to strike. And you can roll in to the Mechatol Rex with a War Sun and a flagship and some other ships to back it up, and just wipe it out with your military superiority. Embers of Muaat are really cool, and just generally speaking, they are fairly straightforward, but they are also fairly fun, because they are the only faction that can start the game with the ability to make War Sons and with a War Sun on the table, which is awesome. But beware, do not really scare every other player into joining together and ganging up on you. It is a danger when playing factions like the Embers of Muaat. Make sure to pick at least one person to table talk with and ally with, and maybe, do a deal with them to give them the fires of the Gashlai to get them War Sun Tech too, so that hopefully you won't have the entire table turning on you. There you have it. If I missed anything, feel free to comment down below. And if you enjoyed this episode of Grokking Twilight Imperium and you'd like to see me do more like it, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on. Hi, what are you doing? What's going on? What's going on? Can I finish my video first? What do you say? Can I finish my video? Okay. Okay. Okay, you go down to the floor and play with your... Oh. Okay, I love you too. Okay. You go play with your toys, okay? You got some toys over there, play with your toys.